Hello and a really warm welcome to another courageous conversation. My name is Pollyanna and I look after community engagement for Tree Sisters and also Tree Sisters Australia. And I'm really thrilled today to be speaking with our very own Suzi Martineau. Hi, Suzi.
Hey.
So we're both a bit slightly schmozzled because it took us a very long time to get all of the tech working. So it's remarkable that we're here at all. Before we get stuck into this conversation, which I've been really looking forward to, I'm just going to briefly share a little with you about Suzi. So Suzi is a mother and a maths teacher and the founder of Tree Conference. And she's currently working on education and alliances within the Tree Sisters Network and a number of different projects, including supporting education through our online community, The Nest, developing collaborative partnerships with reforestation and tree-focused NGOs and grassroots projects, and extending our online database of global reforestation projects, planting methods, legal strategies, education and media networks with a team of fabulous Tree Sisters volunteers, which is all pretty amazing. So I'm going to start with the same question I ask everybody, Suzi. So why are you a Tree Sister?
I started off being a Tree Sister when I was living in Glastonbury, and I had been having a lot of experiences with trees, and I went along to a session, a healing session that was a large group healing session, and I was sharing with somebody about the experiences that I'd been having, and somebody was over from the US and they were like, oh my gosh, you've got to check out Tree Sisters. So I did, and then it ended up being enormously supportive, and that was probably about 3-4 years ago.
Wow, cool. So I'm curious about who the US person was now and how they knew about Tree Sisters.
I think they'd been quite actively involved in the really early in the sort of network stuff online. Yeah. You probably would know their name if I could remember it right now.
I probably would. So you founded the Tree Conference in the UK, and I'd really love you to share with people how you came to be doing the Tree Conference and what it is, and also what it's for. What's the intention behind Tree Conference?
Okay. Well, I as you mentioned, I've got 2 small children, and it turns out the process of having 2 small children quite close together can cause some emotional strain and pressure. And that my way of sorting that, or not that totally sorting, my way of sorting for myself in that really became sitting with trees. I mean, like as in really crying, I'm going to go and sit with this tree. And then I started to be really very supported by the specific trees around my house. And then I started to sit with them quite regularly, and my guidance was always to bring, was to bring a notebook, and that I was supposed to be recording what I was receiving, which I was noticing was different from different trees. And I think I felt like if I'm receiving this sort of information from trees, then there's definitely something I'm supposed to be doing about it. So I started really doing a lot of research based on what was being shown, and that led me to discovering, some really extraordinary global projects like Tree Sisters, and also global science and strategy and policy that felt very timely. So I then felt that in order to honour what I was receiving in that landscape and what I was discovering in terms of the amount of like hope and glory that is come from understanding that relationship with the natural world. So then I set up the Tree Conference in order to have a forum to highlight different science and options to a wider audience. Yeah.
You made that sound very easy. And then I set up the Tree Conference. So I'm sure it wasn't actually that easy.
No.
I know you said before that the intention for the Tree Conference was to bring forward the needs of trees. And I'd like to explore that a little bit more. What are the needs of trees and how do we bring them forward?
Shall I just answer that in one sentence? It turns out the needs of trees are almost as complex as the needs of women. Um, no,
Right.
no. I mean, I could give basic and quick answers. The needs of trees. I suppose the needs of trees are to be whole within the ecosystems in which they're living with sort of with each of the different mineral forms of earth, air, fire, and water being in balance, with having strong root systems able to communicate with each other. But I feel like I'm probably, that question is such a big one that I think I'd like to point towards the education videos that we're looking to prepare in the nest to do that well.
Yeah.
I think if I was to come up with a summary, I would say that the needs of trees create a very clear roadmap about how we need to be moving forward, the decisions that we need to make around pretty much every different level of how we're working. And I'm really grateful that they provide that access and clarity towards how to support ecosystems.
And I want to also pick up on something you said before when you were talking about how you created the tree conference, that you were receiving information from the trees that you then went and researched. For people who've never received any information from a tree, what do you mean when you're saying that? And then have you got any examples of, if maybe you remember, of something that you received from a tree and then you went and picked up on in research?
Okay, so those you're going to have to remember, because I feel like those are three different questions. One, so when you go and stand on top of the hill and you have a memory of somebody, and that whenever you stand on the top of the hill, you think about that person. So I think it feels a little bit like that. If I am spending time with a particular tree, it seems to be that there's particular themes that come into my mind, or and if I'm, and I suppose I've become very up for it being that that's a method of me receiving what I need to from that part of the landscape. But it's also that it comes for me with a lot of lights. So there's a lot of kind of visual confirmation around literally, if I've thought the right thing, little light kind of thing. So and an example, well, I mean, a couple of examples. A lot of the tree conference came from working with the U, and the U has very specific brilliance, though they all are like different sort of facets of a crystal, like different ways into the sort of same consciousness. But with the U, one of its bits of advice, for example, around the tree conference is don't ever do anything that puts off the foresters. It's not okay. Trees are long-term cared for by foresters. Foresters are extraordinary, and they are people who have very, very strong relationships with trees. If they haven't communicated with one, or in the same way as I am given to work, they should not be made to feel wrong or shamed, because they don't work like that, because what they're doing is amazing. So I think quite often it was quite often with regards to the tree conference stuff, it was how to hold a space where everyone can bring what it is that they bring without being made to be wrong for that's what they're bringing. And then another example of following up with research was there was a particular walnut tree by the orchards where I used to live, and I noticed at one point that I was seeing lights emanating from the top of the tree going up into the clouds, and I was really like not really sure what that was about. So I started doing some research around what trees emit, and because there was a feeling was the very strong relationship between trees and clouds, who are also extraordinary beings. It just sounds really weird thing to, and then but they are amazing, aren't they? And then so as I started researching that, I found out about the work of Diana Beresford-Kroeger and the minute aerosol particles that are produced by trees that are a major part of rain precipitation. So how water droplets form, and also what keeps the temperature to around about zero when they're ready to rain. So their role in creating rain, alongside the way that they attract it and also the water that they're emitting at the same time. So that would be an example of following up on something and then seeing really extraordinary science that came from following that.
That's so fascinating. That's so fascinating. And I really love that idea of following, going away and researching and following something that's come to you while you've been sitting with a tree.
It's really hard to hold yourself so much in your love and your appreciation for what it is that it could be that is happening to you, that you can give weird sort of liminal, quite subtle experiences the time and effort to not just acknowledge that they happened, but to think, okay, what does this mean I need to do? Yeah. And I suppose maybe I'm proud of myself that I've done that bit. I mean, I'm not, there's lots of other things I haven't been so great at, but that I have managed to, and it's a lot, but it was a lot of sending love to my womb, and just really trusting that I had something in me first that sort of seemed to lead into that.
And do you think that that capacity to receive information from the landscape is something to do with the feminine?
I think it's something to do with humans and nature. And and I think it is a birthright, but I also think that the culture that we live in and all of the different layers of silt, of disempowerment, really just from the subtlest, somebody not looking at you and you taking that the wrong way, shut down access to that voice. And it must be said that I was also doing a lot of work in the Glastonbury area about what facilitated the voice of the land through my body. So it was quite a lot of work. But I suppose my intention was that I felt like if people talk about consciousness in all things, and I was like, well, if that's true, then I totally think now's the time to be talking to them. And finding out what's going on and what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah I'm totally fascinated by this particular piece, and I'm wondering as well what if there are people out there who would like to hear the voice of the landscape or be in communication, like when you're talking about things that might get in the way, I'm thinking about how fast the pace of life is now, and how if you want to hear anything with any depth, even if it's just understanding a poem, for example, there's a need to slow down and to really slow the pace of your body and what's happening in your life. And we have so many things that keep that high pace up all the time. And I'm wondering,
I do think that's, I think that's a feature in terms of what drops into giving the level of support and nourishment into yourself. But I also think that actually now for me it can be very quick, and it's more about the process. It seems to be more about the process of connecting into a narrative that's coming from my womb rather than a narrative that's coming from my mind. So for example, if I wanted to sort of like fast track connecting in, I might just make sound, but it's the sound that I feel coming from within my body, and the kind of non-Englishness of it, the kind of randomness of it seems to and the focusing on it not making any sense seems to facilitate something much deeper. I can sort of see the imagery of something much deeper that's being expressed at that point, and it sort of bypasses the way that my brain my brain can't come from that space. My brain, it comes from it's sort of intellectual thinking about things space.
Yeah. So can we come back to Tree Conference and what you were saying about creating safe space for everybody, and you making sure that you include the voice of foresters? And I'm really curious about how you create a safe space for everybody. And I was having a conversation earlier today with someone who said that here in Australia, where they've tried to be conversations between people who are in the environmental movement and loggers, that it's occasionally come to fisticuffs. So it's quite a thing to be able to create a space for everyone to have their voice. And I'm curious about how you do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is looking at as an overview of strategically who you need in the room in order to get your narrative across. So I may have a narrative. So if we take last year's event, the year 2018's event in case, I wanted to have a narrative that supported understanding about what was happening in the soil and the effects of farming on soil and land management techniques, because the health on the soil is significantly affecting the health of trees. So I brought in a soil scientist who could speak about nitrogen excesses. Brought in Isabella Tree, who could speak about the effect of rewilding and the insect increase, and the way that she works with planting without using plastic tubes and using thorny scrub. And then we brought in Woodland Trust's the Woodland Trust Woodland Creation Director, John Tucker, because he was an example of somebody who had been working with using plastic things for 30 years, and so they were all given the space to both express their brilliance and the amazing work that they do, and then have a space on the panel for them to kind of to speak together. But and an example of when it was harder was the year before, when I was bringing in a scientist who was one of the top scientists in the UK, who could not say anything that was around tree sentience at all, because it just was not his scientific position, and he was absolutely amazing, the work he'd done and been given to do. And then also having a tree speaker on the panel in the form of Isla MacLeod. So what I did in that instance was brief them both really strongly that I was putting them in this situation, but not because I wanted them to feel like caught off guard or uncomfortable, but because I was wanting to show an example of how our different mindsets can learn from each other and explore where we can go with that. So they were all really well briefed about the nature of the differences, and they were all genuine in their desire to work together around what supports trees.
And how did that conversation unfold? I'm really curious.
You could have a look at it on the YouTube video of the panel. Actually, I don't think we did the full panel. I don't think we showed all of the panel discussion. It went really beautifully, and it was my first go. So I think the panel discussion for the second one was probably better curated, and it's a work in progress. But I did notice that generally the feeling is that the uniting focus around what supports trees, rather than what supports humans who have a particular tree method, it just seems to be that it lifts us out of our individual place of ego, because people do really love trees, and
yeah. So yeah. I'm kind of sitting here, I'm a little bit blown away, really, because I'm thinking about the things that you've talked about and how you've said, that you had two small children quite close together, and the stress that created, and you then were in communication with the landscape, and they said do a tree conference, so you went to and you just did a tree conference. And I'm wondering about, because this is a courageous conversation, how you find the courage to go and do something like that, and to call in scientists and tree speakers and different people to come together to, if you're creating something like a tree conference that you've never created before, it's a new thing, you're not an expert in tree conferences. How do you find the courage to do that? How do you allow yourself to create that?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is a lot of processing, obviously, like there's a huge thing of that, but also like it's also it would almost have been courageous to have not done it, because the impetus was so strong, had such a strong drive, and also because I really do seriously love trees, and it's not okay what's happening, and it, you know, and it's not okay at quite a high rate, and I'm compelled to do whatever I can, and this is the best that I can offer. And we all have, you know, I mean, it is that this is obviously my thing, but there's so much. I feel that we are so powerful. I feel that we are so powerful, and enormous. And I suppose it's the work that the way that working with the way that trees are, and the stars and the night sky and the sun and the moon, you know, the way that the earth is herself so crazily beautiful, that even if you're just managing to represent in the human realm a tiny shard of how beautiful and glorious it is, then it looks like you're doing really, really well.
And have you got, I mean imagining that there's a level of vulnerability in creating something like that, especially for the first time,
it's
and
after.
a level of fear.
No, it's after. No, I'm
right.
on a complete compulsion, and then I get really depressed afterwards. Like I feel really overexposed. I mean, during the time, I don't even think about the fact that if I'm doing a radio interview, I don't even think about it. It's not for me, it's for the trees. Like it's because I'm serving, and I you know, and like I don't like to even imagine like what I looked like in those trousers when I went on stage. Like I can't think about any of it. And then it gets to afterwards, and then everything I've researched and everything I've learned, you know, and then you're not actively doing anything, and that's when it's really hard. And you know, I can't pretend to you it's not really, really hard. And each time I've totally crashed, and I go in and out of that, and that's, yeah, maybe that's where it's courageous is.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds to me like a vulnerability hangover, which, you know, I have those. They're awful. You know, for me, they mostly involve hours and hours of squirming, you know, when I've done an interview or something,
Yeah,
or I've really brought myself forward in a way that felt edgy.
It's like that, except imagine if everything that you'd been doing for the last 6 months had been focused on that day. Right. And then it's more like a week and a half, 2 weeks to recover. But it's also because of what you find out. So, for example, for the first conference and the second, I was really trying to get to speak, to have the Sariaku representing the Living Forest Declaration, which is the most extraordinary 3-page description of the Indigenous relationship with the living forest, and it's what I experienced, and so I know that it's totally amazing. Like it's nailed it, and it's in a document that can be used as a policy document, so, or at least a declaration. So I really,
so who are the Sariaku?
They're in Ecuador,
right?
So I you know, got a couple of people lined up, and then and I had other people I wanted to speak from South America. And then one of the major projects I wanted to speak said there's no way they could do it. They were it was far too politically unstable, and they weren't safe if they went public about what, you know, the extraordinary project they were doing. And then the Sariaku satellite system got knocked out, and they were really ill. And then, you know, the week after the conference, Bolsonaro came into power, and I knew all of the deforestation and reforestation figures and all of those different things, and then the understanding of the impact of that kind of mindset in Brazil after Lola, who had been really contributing a seventh of the global targets to reforestation. And
wow.
And so it was at that point, that was what kind of triggered that year's depression, and that was awful.
And so do you have particular things that you turn to in that scenario that allow you to come back into yourself and
my
keep
first
going?
my first point of call is quite often to lie down and to connect to the center of the earth, connect to the earth, and just hold that connection until I feel like I can get up, and just sort of draw up and draw up and draw up, and really just try and, you know, to really make that connection really, really strong. Once I'm able to get up and about, it's good to go for a walk, and, you know, I'm invariably do get better the more time I spend out. And writing, time with the fire, cord cutting, emotional cord cutting, soul reclamation for the parts of me that just in some of those instances, but sometimes it just is that it's sad, you know, and you know, and that just takes its time. But once I get back, and then once I get back into my whole and into my integrity, I'm massive again, and it's not the same quality of sadness because I know what we're capable of again. You know, that's the sort of strange push me pull you.
So I'm thinking about the amazing women in our network and the women around the world who might like to put on a tree conference, and whether you have any words for them in terms of why they might like to put on a tree conference in their region.
Well, I mean, I suppose the major thing is that you get to support the trees in the landscape that you are, and you get to pull together an audience of people. It gives you an opportunity to put messaging out, and you'll get a far wider reach from any press releases and even just posters up will resonate with people even if they aren't able to attend on the day. You've got, you know, I make a big effort to do the videos so that they're available for people who aren't able to go on the day. But also, I think just they're like a note of caution or something in there where it's so important to feel into the narrative of what it is that you are looking to achieve. In a way, you want to go into the event having an idea of your strategy, how you're going to achieve that, and then so the kind of messaging that's going to come out as a result of what you're putting together. And that's that's when you can make it really have leverage in your local area, and on a wider audience.
By that, do you mean something like, you know, we've got plans to run Tree Conference here in 2021 in Australia, and, you know, one thing that's really high in my mind anyway is the fires. So if you, in terms of narrative, are you talking about having a narrative of, say, how can we support restoration of our forests here when we, you know, in this increasing fire climate?
Exactly. So that would be, and you may have 4 of those. You might find other things emerge, because what I try and do is balance it between head, heart, hands, and kind of womb for like alchemical change. So you might want to get a scientist in who can actually really nail what's going on with the forest floor and leaf mulch, and how it is that the indigenous people of Australia used fire management control techniques, and, you know, however you're going to sort of work and weave that in the bioregion that you're doing the conference. And then you may also find that you've got other, you know, maybe the alchemical womb aspect is inviting some of those representatives to be able to speak in such a way as you sort of also bring in the quality of other aspects of the story that needs telling, in order to meet that. And that could be your main theme that you bring out on a variety of different levels. You know, I probably am ambitious, so I probably have got more than one this year.
So what I'm feeling like I'm hearing is that running Tree Conference is an opportunity to educate and influence, you know, people in the region around a specific tree related theme, like, you know, because for example, it concerns me currently that how we restore forests here in Australia when there's so much fire and people are a little bit afraid of the forest now, and being close to fire. So I guess having a tree conference with a theme like that would allow us to bring forward more voices than certainly
Yeah.
the media are willing to bring forward.
Yeah, and have proper
Yeah,
discussions. And I think if you've had really good prep with all of the speakers and those discussions, and possibly some of the youth representatives, and you know, various different forms, then you can really hold something extraordinary to emerge, which you can kind of have planned for, and then, you know, also will have its own thing. Yeah, I think that's a really valid thing, is to just feel what is that's coming up most present, and to address that. And I think that's what I've done each year, which is, you know, and it is what is going to define the ones of this year. But I'm also really keen to say that I'm really up for exploring with Tree Sisters around coming up with some kind of course or something to support people who want to do tree conferences, because I feel like maintaining that balance between people who have an intuitive relationship with the landscape, and people have a scientific, and people have a sort of administrative and a practical, all of those different relationships, understanding that they can understand each other when you hold them well, and that it really does not need to be oppositional. It's just that that's the habit that we're in, is really, really important, especially if what you're basically trying to do is support the voice of the land in that landscape.
Yeah.
Or
I
the,
love
you know,
that.
and the needs of trees.
I just love that ethos, you know, because people have been pitted against each other in all, you know, in all different fields,
It's so
on so many
divisive.
things forever. It's horrible. I love the idea of being able to bring people together. I had a question for you and it has wandered straight out of my mind, but that's okay. Oh yes, tree conference next year in the UK. What do you know what your theme is?
Yeah, so the ones I'm looking at is the relationship between trees and water in the global weather system, as well as rain precipitation. So that will touch into the effects of deforestation, but I'm much more interested in, I am really interested in that, but I'm interested in making it so that we have a strong expression, and I hope I find the right way of doing this, a strong expression for the role of the relationship between trees and clouds, because I think a lot of the conversation at the moment is around carbon budgeting, and that gives very wonky conclusions sometimes, and yet that's still the overarching decision-making structures that seem to be used within the IPCC and a lot of global amazing things that are happening at the moment. And so I want to shift the emphasis onto what actually supports weather systems, which is also a big call that you get from different scientists contributing towards the IPCC. So I'm wanting to support that in the global in the public discussion. And then I'm very keen on what supports large scale ecosystem restoration when it's done in a way that is, you know, in connection with the needs of that landscape and those local communities, rather than implemented in a top down approach, which again seems to be a theme of what's happening through things like the Global Landscape Forum and various other things. Huge desire to reforest in the UK, all of the political parties looking to contribute towards planting, and the need for, so with Alan Watson Featherstone looking at ecosystem restoration both in Scotland, in China, and what's coming up as particularly important at the moment in Greenland, because we're looking at different methods of planting on the permafrost to support the methane to stay in the ground. And that's a huge one that came out of Claire's work with Anangak from the Inuit, and his request for support in reforestation in Greenland. And Alan's had work in reforesting at those latitudes in Siberia. So that talk is, so that would be, those are two of the themes that I'm looking to move forward with.
So if there are women watching who want to participate in or support or attend the tree conference in the UK next year,
it's
how
the
can they do
2nd of
that?
May. well, I mean, we're just in the process of putting tickets up. It's the 2nd of May. It's in Cambridge. I think we will be live streaming, and volunteers are going through Claire Marie, and the website is the treeconference.com. It will be being run in collaboration with Tree Sisters now. So we're also really hoping to get up the sort of support for watch parties and support for women within the and men, Tree Sisters, to step in around what they would need. So training, if it is that people want to take that, so that we can run it as a bit more of an open sourced event, so that people can see what they can take from and what would be relevant for them.
So if people want to volunteer to help at the Tree Conference, can they write to support at Tree Sisters?
I suppose so. I think it goes to Claire Marie, though she may already have, I think she's already got some people. I think that, yeah, I probably ought not to say too much without checking in with her again.
Okay, so if you are interested and you do want to find out more, you can write to support@treesisters.org, and the email will get directed in the right direction, whatever that happens to be. So I'm conscious of the time, and I think I'd love you to just share any last thoughts that you might have around all of this as a sort of parting message, whether it's an inspiration for others to pick up the Tree Conference and do it, or something that you'd like to share about where we're going in terms of the trees, but whatever just feels most alive in you right now.
Okay, well, what feels most alive in me is that this is a huge, huge piece of work, this consciousness shift, this movement that we're all contributing towards globally at the moment. And it's like waves of frontline work. So what it is to step up requires quite significant work within yourself, and kind of sort of warrior training, really, in some ways, energetically. And then the in-breath again of being able to step back and know that there's other people to come forward to keep up the movement. And by movement, I mean sort of into the paradigm shift that we're needing to make and support to happen for our children. So yeah, I suppose just real just love, so much love and acceptance of how hard it is, and how vulnerable we are in it, and if it rises in you that kind of need to be part of that front line, then what is really, we can explore together what is the work that helps people to feel equipped in their conversation, in their ability to articulate, in their understanding of what moves and choices, what they can do to support through multiple different levels. And it'd be sending love. That's the main thing.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone who's been watching. If you are not yet donating for the trees, we'd really love you to join us in doing that. And we now have this really fabulous addition to our website that means that you can actually see how many trees you've funded if you're growing a forest with us, if you log into your account. So please do come and join us. We are funding 10 really amazing projects across the tropics now. You can join us by going to www.treesisters.org/donate, and you can also find out loads more about our projects on our website. Come and join us in our online community, The Nest. And thank you so much, Suzi, for speaking with us.
Thank you, Pollyanna. That was really enjoyable.